was like, well, I know they wasn't that pretty, you know. Well, brother, it's good to see all of you guys here. Let's do this roll thing real quick. Reggie, good to see you in person. Peter, you back there? Is Peter back there? Oh, Mark ain't with us tonight. Hope he's okay. Did you say Puerto Rico? Oh. Man, you got Alaska, Panama. I go to Florida. I think I'm being exotic. Well, brethren, it's good to see. If you're taking this for credit, make sure that I have your... Whoop. Mike, are you still working on yours? Yeah, you can go ahead. What's that, huh? Roger that. Hey, I admire that. They didn't give us options when I was in school. I always wish they had. Hey, thank you. Reggie Carter, you're quoting out of the ESV? There's a KJV. Finally, one good one. No, it's just the one we're going to sing the song. Let's go ahead and jump in, page 32. We're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 24. Going to be looking at some baskets of figs. Anybody here ever had figs? Figs. Used to have a fig tree. I've got a guy at Trenton telling me he's got a fig tree, but said last year nothing came in. Closest I've come to figs, as far as I know, are fig Newtons. And people tell me that's not really what a fig tastes like. But I'm like, okay. But what's that? Good and sweet. My wife, we don't even buy fig Newtons because she can't stand them. So I'm like, okay. So I don't get them either, but it's all right. Let me go ahead and get to Jeremiah 24. Short chapter. Not like most of them, huh? Notice Jeremiah sees a vision of the two figs, and then God explains exactly what those figs mean. And notice this is after the second deporting of Jews to Babylon, which was in 598 or 597 BC. So let's go ahead and look at our questions. When did Jeremiah see the two baskets of figs? Well, this is after Nebuchadnezzar had carried away King Jeconiah captive to Babylon during the reign of Zedekiah in Judah. Number two, which people do the good figs symbolize? Well, they're the ones who are doing what God says. They're going to surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. They're going to live, and they're going to go to Babylon like God has told them they were going to go. And that's who are represented by the good figs. They go to the land of Chaldea, and they or their offspring would return. Granted, by the time of the third deportation, you're still looking at solid close to 50 years. So indeed, if you had any age on you, you probably wouldn't make the return trip, but your children would. Number three, after they would be taken as captives to Babylon, what kind of heart would God's people need in order to please Him? Yeah, a heart to know God, a whole heart, one that opens up to what God says. And if you ever think that you got this Christianity thing down pretty good, jump over on the very first sermon in the New Testament, and look at what God has to say about murder. Then look at what Jesus says about hating your brother, and saying Rocco. We don't even know what that means, but we got an idea that you're just bad-mouthing somebody. And then thou fool, and how quickly our mouths can get us into so much trouble. You look at there again when he says, you've heard it said, can't commit adultery, don't commit adultery. And absolutely, that's right. But the Pharisees and the scribes were missing the heart of the matter. when he would say, I say unto you, if a man look upon a woman to lust after her, he's committed adultery with her or in his heart. So it's a heart thing. Not just want to know God, but to do it with your whole heart. Be willing to surrender yourself. Number 4, which people did the bad figs symbolize? Well, it'd be all those people that weren't good figs, right? And that would include Zedekiah, most of your prominent families, the ones who are going to rebel, the ones who are going to fight, those that try to remain, those who go to Egypt. I was listening to a bit of Wayne Jackson's book. I kind of cheat on stuff like that, brethren. I'm sorry. But I'll tell you how I cheat. You can cheat too. I buy those books. I have Perry Hillis cut the spines off of them. I scan them. And then once you take that PDF, you can dump it into a program called Speechify. And it will read it to you. Kind of got mad at Speechify there for a while because every time I opened that up, it would always give me the voice of Obama. And I said, this is not the voice I want reading to me. So every time I'd have to change that thing. I went with some fella named John, you know. But that's what I listen to. You can listen to them quickly, and you can read it. And unless you're in the car, I recommend you don't do that. But you can read along with it because I was in the Army. And the Army is for people that aren't as smart as the Air Force or Navy guys. And so they had to teach us by showing us, making us do it over and over. And they'd give us pictures, you know. And, you know, between them telling us, between us having to read it and between us seeing the pictures, you know, you can put that together. And that's, you know, Micah, me and you was talking about memorization techniques and stuff, and that's along the same lines. You know, you're kind of double reinforcing as you go through that. I told you all of that to tell you this. Brother Jackson, in his little commentary on Jeremiah, talked about how they found some remnants of a temple-like structure in Egypt that was in a part of a community known to have been occupied by the Hebrews, because you know you had some folks run down there. In fact, at the end of Jeremiah, we're going to talk about a whole group that goes down there, and it appears as though they forced Jeremiah to go with them. And it's believed, although we do not have a biblical account of it, but folks, you know, that study such matters and kind of, you know, read into things, say that they believe that's probably where Jeremiah died. But anyway, I thought that was kind of neat. Let's jump on in there to Jeremiah 25. Babylon will rule over Judah and the surrounding nations for 70 years. Just that's the way it's going to be. And, you know, the best thing you can do is acquiesce to it. And notice the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people in Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. There's more timelines where we can figure out when exactly this is being said. Which Jeremiah the prophet spake unto all the people of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, saying, from the 13th year of Josiah, the son of Ammon, king of Judah, even to this day, that is the 23 year, the word of the Lord hath come unto me, and I have spoken unto you. It's believed that he's probably about halfway through his ministry here. And he says, rising early and speaking, but ye have not hearkened. Now you're going to see that repeatedly in the book of Jeremiah, when God even says, I've sent you prophets, you know, early in the morning. Here we have a thing where Jeremiah is saying, I've come to you early in the morning. Later in the, I can't remember what chapter, like 33 or 34, he talks about, I have come to you early in the morning. The idea there is, when somebody gets up early in the morning, who do you think of getting up early in the morning? When you think of people getting up early in the morning, who do you think of? What's that? Yeah, they ain't got no time to spare, do they? They need to use every ounce of daylight they have, because once it gets dark, you just can't do a lot of things you need to do in farming. So we think of this, the work ethic in there, so they don't waste any time. They're not lazy people. And God is saying, I got up early. And what is he saying? Didn't waste any opportunity. The urgency that these people need to be warned. And God said, I've taken that urgency with you. Later on here, Jeremiah is saying, I have taken that urgency with you, but you hadn't listened. And I've spent about half my life now, you know, preaching to you, and you ain't listening. I don't think anybody my wife works with will probably watch this, so I think I'm free to say this. She was in her unit. My wife's been doing the same nursing job for 39 years now. I think she's got it down. But anyway, these younger nurses will ask her things from time to time, and she said, I'm telling you, They're in here tonight. They're asking me, and I told them what to do, and they're not listening. They're trying to do it some other way anyway. She says, like they won't listen to me. And I said, Stephanie, welcome to my world. You preach your whole life, and it's hard, some brethren, you got to tell them, you know what you're supposed to be at on Sunday nights, Wednesday nights. We've talked about this. It's kind of sometimes falling on deaf ears. But that's exactly what's happening here. They're not listening. And the Lord hath sent unto you all his servants, the prophets, rising early and sending them, but you have not hearkened, nor inclined your ear to hear. They said, turn ye again, now everyone from his evil way, from the evil of your doings. Dwell in the land the Lord hath given you, and to your fathers forever and ever. And go not after other gods, but guess what? Just not going to listen to it. So, after 70 years, God will punish Babylon. He's going to take Judah into Babylon, and then, you know what? He's going to deal with them. Do you remember the book of Habakkuk? Habakkuk's got a complaint to God. And basically Habakkuk starts out saying, God, we're just some wicked folks here in Jerusalem. We're pretty sorry individuals. How long are you going to put up with this? And the answer is, God says, I'm about done with it right here. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to bring down the armies from the north. And Habakkuk's like, oh, wait a minute. We're pretty sorry, but those guys are even worse than we are. How can you do that? How can you use them to punish us? And, of course, God says, well, when I'm done using them as a tool, I'm going to take care of them. Same thing going on with Nebuchadnezzar. He's even going to call Nebuchadnezzar his servant. And that later in a few chapters. And what he's saying there is not that Nebuchadnezzar is a God-fearer and, worships the God of heaven. What he's saying is he's a tool. And I'm going to use him for what I need to use him for. And then I'm going to deal with him, of course. And he's going to use the Medes and the Persians to take care of that. So God's cup of fury is going to be poured out. And the nations surrounding Judah. God's judgment is going to be on the whole world. Notice there, question number 1, says God referred to Nebuchadnezzar as, well, that's what we were talking about. I should have waited, shouldn't I? As my servant. He was going to destroy Jerusalem, and he's simply a tool, but he's a pagan. He's a sorry individual. He'd just soon kill you as look at you. His soldiers are going to go in there, and they're going to do awful things. And he's okay with that, just as long as they bring him the gold and everything so that he can keep his machine going. Later on, we think he learns a little bit about the God of heaven for sure. He says that he does, but there's no reason to think that he leaves his pagan ways. Somebody like him would be a lot like the Romans. The Romans would go around and they'd conquer people and they'd just grab their gods and take them with them. And, it wasn't a thing to them how many. And that's one of the problems. Michael Hughes has been a missionary in India for years. Met Michael here, learned to love him then, still love him. He's a great guy. Just has a super huge spot in his heart for Indians. And I'm not talking about the Plains Indians either. I'm talking about the Indian from across the ocean there. And he said that's one of the things you have to be careful. This is 20 years ago. He said you have to be careful because they'll just, they don't have a problem with worshiping the God of heaven. But to say that you can only worship the God of heaven, that's when you start going against the grain, because they just add him to their little arsenal of all the gods they've got. So same thing with these guys. Notice number 2, how long would the land of Judah be desolate and the nations of the Middle East serve the king of Babylon? Notice that, the nations of the Middle East, this is going to be greater than just Jerusalem and Judah. All these nations, later on we're going to read a prophecy that's given to Esau, or the Edomites, land of Edom, and Ammon, and then Moab, all of those surrounding, Tyre, Sidon, the Canaanite cities, all of them are going to fall in line and they are going to worship, listen to me, they are going to serve the king of Babylon. Why is that? Let's think about that for a moment. Let's look at the bigger picture. Why do you reckon all them nations are going to serve the king of Babylon? Not everybody at once. Raise your hand. This is roar. I can't deal with it. What does Daniel see in Daniel chapter 2? Actually interprets what did Nebuchadnezzar dream. Remember that? Yeah, it's a big statue, different kingdoms. And who's that first king there on top with the head of gold? Who was that? Nebuchadnezzar. And he's described in chapter 4 as what? A huge tree. Remember? and everybody eats under his branches. He's that head of gold. There's never going to be a kingdom rise up and be that great as his was as far as the pagans go, under one man. One man ruling it all. And so these vassal states that are around Jerusalem, they too are going to have to serve Nebuchadnezzar so that he'll be that kingdom that God is talking about, how that's going to take place, and then the kingdoms come and go as God says, and then that way we know when the Messiah is coming. Notice, how long would the land of Judah be desolate? Well, we've already said 70 years, right? And the nations of the Middle East serve the king of Babylon. Give the historical dates for that time period. Well, what I did is I went back. I have 605 BC is the 4th year of Jehoiakim. 536 BC would be the decree of Cyrus. Do you remember who Cyrus was? He's going to be that Persian king that's going to come on board there after take it away from Belteshazzar, if you will, one of the grandchildren of Nebuchadnezzar. And he's going to start what is referred to as the Medo-Persian Empire, the Medes. Darius, of course, is a Mede. Cyrus, though, is going to be a Persian because Persia is going to be a little bit stronger. You got a couple of nations kind of working together there, but it doesn't last long, nor does it usually. And so you have this decree of Cyrus for the Jews to go back, and so it works out approximately to 70 years. And, because some people will tell you that 70 is just the number 7 times 10, a particular amount of time. But the numbers are pretty exact there. So I won't have any problem at all saying that's an exact number and not just a figure of speech, as some like to say. Number 3, God referred to the iniquity of Babylon. The prophet Daniel also spoke to King Nebuchadnezzar about his iniquities. Remember, he wouldn't take care of the poor. Daniel tries to tell him, look, boy, if you'll clean this up, God will have mercy on you, but, keep your pride down. But it just didn't work for him. He had to learn the hard way. It says, what do these truths show us about whether or not Gentiles were under the law of God, or God's law, during the Old Testament? Well, they're definitely accountable, aren't they? And what was Jonah dispatched to do? Do you remember that? Who did Jonah go preach to? Remember, he was supposed to go to what city? Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of who? Assyria. And those guys are pagans. And yet God tells them they need to do what? You need to repent. So obviously they are accountable. And I figured y'all probably talked enough about this in your Romans class. We probably don't need to spend a lot of time with it. But they're not accountable to keeping the Sabbath and offering sacrifices in Jerusalem, okay? They have their own, system. But they need to be faithful to it. Murder is wrong in any law. And so they were accountable to God. And as a result, you see Roger has on there Romans 4:15, and I'm sure y'all have covered that. Number 4, what does it mean for a nation to drink the cup, or the wine cup, of God's fury? Well, it's definitely a metaphor. And when you're drinking a cup, you're satiating yourself. You're filling yourself up. And what are, in this case, what are we filling ourselves up with? About the last thing in this world we'd want to have a cup of, right? God's fury. He's going to be mad. Anger, and a righteous indignation. That's one of the things I have trouble trying to. When I think of God's anger and God being mad, I think about how it is when Ron's mad or Ron's angry. Well, that's not how it works. God is pure. It also means that, how sometimes mine and yours hearts can be pulled, Any of y'all see Forrest Gump? Did you cry at the end? When Jenny died? I mean, it's been a long time, but I'm pretty sure I did. I'm an emotional being, so sometimes when our emotion strings, get tugged on like that, we'll bend one way, maybe not do exactly what we said we was going to do as far as punishment, but God is, he doesn't have that emotional side to him where we can persuade him to do that which is wrong. He's just not going to do that. So I put on there, they would certainly not go unpunished. All right, Jeremiah 26. More threats to kill Jeremiah after he preached in the temple. You'd think they'd get tired of it, but they don't. Once again, Jeremiah finds himself in the temple. He's preaching basically the same sermon he was preaching the first time he went in the temple and preached. And that is, they need to repent. It says, number one there, after Jeremiah preached God's message in the temple, the priests and prophets, boy, you got to love that. The very guys who should be upholding the Word of God are the ones saying, you will surely die. And why are they so angry at Jeremiah? Anybody? Yes. You know what I think even cut them deeper than that? He was doing what they were too tired to do. You know, brethren, we got to be careful. I know brethren in the past times who've gotten upset with other brethren because they was workers. And they'd do something. They'd go out and try to convert people, and they'd try to do things, and people would be questioning their motives. And a lot of times that's not really questioning their motives so much as it is trying to find some way to salve your own conscience because you're not doing it. You know, we're too scared to do it, and who are you to dare even try? And also, they're making a little profit off that, aren't they? Well, because he told them the truth. A lot of people don't want to hear the truth. Enough said there. This house would be like Shiloh. Now, what's the interesting thing about Shiloh? Shiloh was the place that the tabernacle stayed until David was bringing all that, back to Jerusalem. And what happened to Shiloh? Shiloh was destroyed. If you went there during the time of Jeremiah, you would not have seen anything significant. It was demolished. And the point is, if you think this temple here is protecting you, then you need to go look at Shiloh and see what God says, what I have done to Shiloh. Again, number two, how could Judah avoid the destruction that Jeremiah foretold? Oh, just every opportunity. Sometimes you're just a broken record. All they had to do was quit doing what they were doing, which is being bad, and do what God would have them to do. And so you're going to have these princes, and the common people are going to come to Jeremiah's aid here and say, look, man, you shouldn't be killing this guy for telling us the truth. Years ago, I had just become a Christian, but I was fired up for God. I could not believe what the Church of Christ was teaching compared to what I had been taught, and how it went right with what the Bible was saying, and everything that was taught was pulled right out of the Bible. I could see it, and I'd just be like, man, that makes sense. That's exactly what that's saying. I don't know why I ever fought against that. Well, I was a note taker. I was really on fire for God. Young man, just like I said, I was 15, had just obeyed the gospel for about 6 months earlier, and then they had a business meeting and they fired the preacher. And you know why they fired the preacher? Because he's preaching the truth. And so the vote was 15-1 to fire him. Guess who the one was? Me. And what was so bad? It was my wife's family. She was the one that was in adultery. I have to admit, though, Brother Baker maybe could have approached that a little bit differently. Maybe hit it, maybe one time there and backed off a little bit, then come back around, maybe nailed it again, later on. You know what I'm saying? But, some preachers, boy, he latch on, boy, and he's there. What he's saying was right. And what made that whole situation better if that woman had just repented. But she didn't, and when you ken to half the church, well, I imagine all of you probably seen a scenario like that. It was a real shame, and it killed me. Kind of hurt me. We ended up going over to another congregation local, and I just died. That's my fault. I was 15. I didn't know better. Sometimes you got to prepare yourself to hear. And we just didn't go to a place that was feeding it. You ever been to the mess hall and you go down through there and you got your tray and nobody puts nothing on it? If you do that for a couple of weeks, you're going to be a mighty hungry man. Preachers, we need to remember that, man. When the brethren sit down, we need to feed them. We need to feed them sometimes a little bit more than that milquetoast stuff. We need to give them something to chew on. And if you're not, then you can have a whole lot of little weak-kneed, unhealthy, bones not developed, not growing Christians. We need to be careful with that. Well, there's my 2 cents. So who are they going to bring up as an historical example of what's happening with Jeremiah? Micah the Morashite. Now, who are they talking about? Yeah, they're talking about old Micah, the same Micah that was contemporary with Isaiah. And what did he do? He was preaching at the time of Hezekiah. Who else was preaching during the time of Hezekiah? His book's in front of this one. Isaiah. Remember, that's who Hezekiah sends his man to go see what Isaiah's got to say about it, you know. And so they petition Isaiah, and of course Isaiah, you know, even Hezekiah will go into the temple there and pray to the God of heaven about the Assyrian king's threats. But Isaiah's working, and you got Micah working there, and it's amazing to me that we're in Jerusalem, place that Isaiah labored, but they quote the country preacher. What's that say, huh? Tell us old Hicks ain't got a little bit of influence every now and then. Instead of the stately Isaiah, the messianic prophet we talk about so much, they were talking about, what about old Micah? He did that, and nobody killed him. Unfortunately, the bad guys had their own example, you know, and they say, well, what about this other fellow over here that the king went down there? His name was Uriah. You remember king sent people down there and brought him back and killed him with a sword. And so they're saying, well, we didn't kill this one. And they're saying, well, we did kill this one. And just be thankful that one of the princes there steps in, Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, and says, no, we're not going to do this. And aren't we thankful for good people who will stand up? You know, brethren, when you have an eldership, it'd be real good if from time to time, you know, I'm sitting here talking to basically a congregation, aren't you? Y'all got elders. It'd be good every now and then if elders would stand up and say, you know what the preacher said today? Amen. That's where we stand. We stand with him. We stand with where God is, and he's preaching God's word, and that's where we stand. Sometimes we just let that, whew, you probably need to go talk to him about that, you know. let him take the heat. No, it needs to be a concerted effort, and shepherds need to be out there in front doing the shepherding. Let's look chapter 27, the yoke of the king of Babylon. Probably one of the most recognizable illustrations in all the Old Testament. God has Jeremiah to put a yoke on. And I've wondered about that. And I guess there were single yokes, right? You know, Reggie, you're a country boy. You know much about that yoking oxen and yoking mules and that stuff? Okay, so single yoke's a thing, right? Right? So I guess that's what Jeremiah's got on. Because, you know, that makes sense. Because all the times I thought about that, I thought, well, I wonder what we do with that other half. But I guess you can just have a single. Well, anyway, he's wearing his yoke. There's a false prophet's got him a yoke, right? And, of course, he says that you're not going to have that yoke. And they're preaching two different messages. Jeremiah saying it's going to be 70 years. This false prophet is saying, oh, no, it's only going to be 2. And so let's take a look at our questions as we go through this chapter. It says, what was the meaning of the bonds and the yokes that Jeremiah was supposed to make? Well, Judah, as well as the rest of the nations of the confederacy. Notice he's talking to all these boys now, Edom, Moab, Tyre, Zidon. You need to submit to Nebuchadnezzar. This is the way it's going to be. And God's promised to any nation that would put its neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, you can remain in your land. You don't have to die. But, you know, people don't like to listen. That's basically kings and people who are in authority, afraid they're going to lose something. So, number 3, what lies were false prophets in Judah telling the people at this time about Babylon and the temple vessels? Well, the one fellow we were talking about here for sure says that within 2 years they're going to bring all those vessels back. And what does the Bible say? They were prophesying a lie. Number 4, Nebuchadnezzar early had carried some of the vessels from Jerusalem's temple to Babylon. They were there 70 years later, weren't they? You remember an old boy having a party there in Daniel chapter 5, wasn't he? And drinking out of the vessels and so forth, and all of a sudden he saw what? The writing on the wall. Don't you love when you hear that, the writing on the wall? Because, I mean, there's so many expressions that, you know, have their beginnings, you know, in the Bible. I'm afraid we're losing a lot of those in our current vernacular Because we'd say that old fella, he could see the writing on the wall. That means it's the end of the thing, right? And, well, I appreciate that. Notice what two lies did Hananiah, there's our boy, king of Babylon, what two lies did he tell? Well, first of all, that the yoke of the king of Babylon had been broken. He said within 2 years, the vessels of the Lord's house and the king would restore the vessels and the king and all the captives. Well, that wasn't right, was it? And so, number 2 there, when Hananiah made his prophecy, the people of Judah had only been in Babylon for a little over 10 years. Jeremiah had said it's going to be 70 years. And so now we can kind of just sit back and see who was right. Well, I guarantee you when 15 rolled around, everybody had a real good idea of who was right in that one, don't you? Number 3, what did Hananiah do with the wooden yoke on Jeremiah's neck? Well, he took it off and he broke it. He broke the yoke, and of course he's trying to say, that's what's happened here. The yoke has been broken. Well, wrong answer. Number 4, what yoke of iron did Jehovah put in place? Well, he put one in whereby Hananiah would be under and would remain under, and it wouldn't be broken. And what was his penalty there? Number 5, what was God's explanation about why Hananiah died that same year? He would die because he had taught, what was the word? Rebellion. And what is rebellion? Think about that, brethren. What is rebellion? When we know to do something God has told us to do, and we don't. Now, you might not be shaking your fist and going, I'm rebelling again, but you're not doing it. It's the same thing. It's just a more passive, way to do that. Well, it makes you want to stop and think for a minute, don't it? Well, we got to keep moving, though. Hey, by the way, overall, we're doing quite well, I believe. As of tonight, we were supposed to start in chapter 27, and looky there, we're going to be done where we're supposed to be. Man, let's quit right here. I hate being on time, don't you? We stay behind. That's great. We did even better than I thought we would. Jeremiah 29, Jeremiah's letter to Jewish captives in Babylon. And boy, you tell me these fellows didn't have a better postal system than we do. He writes to Babylon, and you have people in Babylon writing him back, and it's getting their lickety-split, if you will. So Jeremiah's going to sit down and write this letter, and then this false prophet, Shemaiah, writes a letter from Babylon to the priests in Jerusalem. And I mean, wouldn't that have been interesting if his had got lost? But they apparently didn't. Notice question number 1 there. To which people did Jeremiah write an important letter from Jerusalem? Well, we've already answered that. To the captives in Babylon. Number 2, concerning the daily lives and social activities of the exiled Jews, what did the Lord, via Jeremiah, instruct them to do? Don't rebel. Be at peace. Have children. Get married. Have your children marry, have your sons marry daughters and have your daughters marry sons. Have grandchildren. Build houses. Plant gardens. Prosper. Get wealth. You need to grow. I was just watching, I watch too much YouTube, I think. But I was watching Elon Musk talk about him and Bill Gates. If you listen to Bill Gates talk, we've got too many people. And cows, cutting wind and stuff are destroying the planet, and we need to get rid of them too. They're saying we're becoming, extinct. But what is Elon Musk? Right the opposite. Expansionist. Saying at the current rate, we're losing population. We need to have more babies, And so you have two different views there. And you could have some people who would take that extinctionist, philosophy and say, well, we go to Babylon, we'll just try to lay under the radar and not cause too much trouble, and maybe we can get out of there with something. And God's like, no, man, y'all go down there and prosper, build houses, gain wealth, get children, grandchildren. A mighty nation is going to come from you. You can't lose focus of the goal just because of the situation you're in. You got to appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Was that the group that obey God by going out of the city?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
the group that is in Babylon.
right? And you know, even in that group, you're going to have mixed reviews and mixed parties, because you've got those who are just eating up the fact, well, look, man, it's going to be a lot shorter. You know, we're only going to be here for a few years. You know, it's not going to be bad. They're getting report, and one of the things that was causing that is they're getting mail from Jerusalem. People are doing fine. They're buying things and trading things, and the economy seems to be okay. And God all along saying, "Oh, listen, Jerusalem's going to fall." That was Ezekiel's message. Remember, he's there and he's building sage mounds. Remember, like kind of got a skillet there, you know, using that as that iron wall and little toy soldiers and stuff. And people are like, "What in the world is he doing?" And he's preaching, "Listen, Jerusalem is going to fall." And so they're getting these letters, and, you know, you can see there's communication back and forth. Jerusalem's fine. It doesn't seem like it's going to be. Yeah, it is. God's already said it's going to be destroyed. Of course it is. And so these people, and that was Ezekiel's role. And Jeremiah's got a tough role. Ezekiel's got a tough role in that he has to switch gears from, look, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, to like, okay, we knew that was going to happen. It has happened. But don't let that take the wind out of yourselves. This is exactly what's supposed to happen. Then, you know, in a few years, we're going to go back. And that's why we've got to prosper. That's why we've got to be faithful. We've got to have children. And our children are going to be the ones that are going to lead this charge, you know, back to Jerusalem. When you look at the scope of how many people were taken and then how many people returned, it seems like it's almost the same amount of folks that were taken go back. You know, it wasn't a huge number that go back. And, boy, Reggie, I can understand that. You know, I moved about 7 years ago, and I think that's about the last move I'm going to get out of my wife. And you know what? I'm not going to fight her over it, because that moving's a hard thing, ain't it? Now, imagine you go into this land of Chaldea, you've bought land, you have herds, and your family, you know, got kids, and the grandkids, they're all out there, and then everybody says, well, let's go back to Jerusalem. You can see why you might be a little hesitant to do that, and a lot of them don't. And the ones that don't go back help support the ones that do go back. And you know a couple of the ones that don't go back, we could name them right now. You got Queen Esther, and what was her uncle's name? Mordecai. And what do? They do quite well in the Persian capital. And so you got Daniel. You've got some great officials in the Persian kingdom, if you will, who were Jews who did not go back to Jerusalem. So it wasn't a mandatory thing. But it was something that was good, because what was so important about going back to Jerusalem? Well, Isaiah 2, right? The mountain of the Lord's house is going to be in Jerusalem, and the law of the Lord is going to go from where? Zion, yeah, Jerusalem. And so, boy, we need somebody there to make that happen. And so, you know, those who had the vigor and the zealots, you know, the folks that were like, really want to make it happen, they're the ones that go. And aren't we thankful for that? 70 years, talked about that. 70 years he would visit them, bring them back to Jerusalem. If they seek the Lord with all their heart, he would hear them and be found. There you go. There's the answer for the question I didn't read. Number 4, why did Nebuchadnezzar kill 2 Jewish men, Zedekiah and Ahab? What does the Bible say? It says they committed villainy. Now, if you look that up in Strong's, it has the idea of adultery, senselessness, folly, disgraceful, moral wickedness. Now, what exactly was their crime? The New American Standard Bible translates that acted foolishly. The ASV says wrought folly. The Christian Standard, which is the old Holman, translates that committed outrage. And the ESV says done an outrageous thing. So they had done something that was not good, and so Nebuchadnezzar has these 2 men killed in the fire. Number 5, which other false Jewish prophet in captivity in Babylon sent a letter to God's people? Well, that is Shemaiah, the Nehemite. In Jerusalem, he says, what does he write? What does he say? Jeremiah's letter is causing problems here with the captives. And why is that? Well, he's telling them to acquiesce. Don't rebel. Don't bring reproach on yourself. Don't get arrested. Don't get get in trouble with the police, so to speak. Live at peace, prosper, and get better. And he's saying that's a problem. And of course, people be upset thinking, just a couple of years, and now Jeremiah's saying 50 more. Well, number 6, there are named 2 influences that Shemaiah's false messages had on the Jews in Babylon. Well, verse 31, they trusted in a lie. Boy, brethren, how many people in the world today are trusting in a lie? How many religious people are trusting in a lie today? They've heard some man say some kind of goofy code or something about how you saved. You just got to ask Jesus to come into your heart, or touch the radio, or whatever they've come up with. And folks have confidence in that. They trust in that instead of listening to God and what God has said in His Word. Verse 32, taught them rebellion. Again, here comes that word rebellion. This is God's plan. If you're going to be God's people, you have to do what's in the plan that God has laid down. And the plan is Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. It's going to be given its Sabbath rest, if you will. They had never observed that 7th year, it seems. And so, God says the land's going to have a break from you guys for this amount of time. And then you're going to go back and you're going to deliver on this message. You're also going to be broke from your idolatry, which was a huge problem. All right, let's drive right on in. Josh, I just want to tell you, man, you're doing great. Doing great. You need some more coffee? I think she poured it out. We might go over there and take a whiff in the drain. I've been there, buddy, I know. Jeremiah chapter 30, promises of restoration. Notice this section is a section of hope. In fact, the next 4 chapters, including chapter 30. While speaking of the literal turn of the literal Jews to the literal land of Canaan, in some instances, these chapters point to the coming days of the Messiah. That is not something to fight, brethren. And listen, when our denominational friends just take off, man, like an unleashed Doberman, and want to apply everything, yes, there's some language in here. It's going to be talking about the Jews going back to Jerusalem 500 years before the Christ, if you will. But some of it's going to be talking about Jesus. Some of it's going to be talking about the branch. When righteousness would return to the throne of David and would be for everlasting. And so you have to let the message say what it's saying. Don't try to read too much into it, but don't take everything away from it. Same thing with Isaiah. A lot of the things Isaiah has to say, and I'll be the first to admit it, it's difficult to figure out, was he talking about the Messianic kingdoms, or are he talking about the restoration from the Babylonian captivity? And the great thing is that you know that. You know that there's two. There's 2 different things there. And so a lot of our denominational friends of who I was one, I didn't know anything about the restoration of the Nehemiah, Esther, Zerubbabel. I had no idea that took place. And so when I heard about the Valley of Dry Bones and stuff, and this preacher's telling me that's Israel being restored, I'm like, well, that sure sounds like what that is, man, That's a real restoration. And then somebody pointed out, that already happened. I'm like, what? What do you mean it already happened? And so then you get a little church history, and you're like, man, they was leading me around in the wrong direction. So we got to be careful. So let the passage say what it's saying. And don't get so beat up on yourself if you can't figure out exactly which of the 2 it's talking about. Can't get over that, can you? Absolutely. It's quoted twice in the book of Hebrews. And as far as I know, now Jim knows a lot more about the Bible than I do, but as far as I know, that is the single longest quote in the New Testament of an Old Testament passage. And so we'll cover that when we get to Jeremiah 31. But indeed, that's exactly right. And so that's one of those unget-overables, isn't it? I mean, we know when Peter stands up and says, this is that which was spoken of by the prophet Joel, you're like, okay, I got this. All right, I might not know when some of that stuff's talking about, but when an inspired man stands up and says, this is it, I'm going to ride that out, right? Kind of like Hebrews. When you have an inspired writer say, quoting from Jeremiah 31 and saying, this is how that's applied, we're in pretty good shape right there knowing that. So Some of those passages, not so clear. And so we won't beat each other up on such things. It says, name 3 Old Testament chapters. Boy, I had a lot of fun with this one. I hope you had as much fun as I did. What 3 chapters did you get? Anybody? I went with Ezra 1. And if you remember, Ezra gives you 2 accounts of that. So I went with Ezra 1, Ezra 7, and then Nehemiah 2. And I may have missed that by a country mile, but at least I think that's what he was asking about. Name 3 Old Testament chapters in which we read about Jehovah bringing his people back. That Ezra chapter 1 is Zerubbabel and that whole bunch. The second one that Ezra goes through is when he goes back to teach the law. And, of course, Nehemiah is when he's going back to do what? Remember what Nehemiah did? Rebuilt the wall. Remember? Okay. That's what I went with. So if you got something different, that'll be fine. Number 2, if Israel, that being the northern kingdom, and that's another play on words, and you got to read your Bible. You got to realize that sometimes these prophets say things, and I couldn't figure out why in the world God was so mad at that one tribe named Ephraim. Hosea gives him down the road, right? Well, come to find out, when I read more and get to know a little bit better, when Hosea says Ephraim, he's not just talking about the land allotment to Ephraim or just even the tribe of Ephraim. But Ephraim had become such a large tribe, he used it to talk about the entire northern kingdom. That's what's being expressed here as well. If Israel, the northern kingdom, already had been destroyed when Jeremiah lived, then why did his prophecy about restoration include both Israel and Judah? Well, something to, think about for a moment. Just because you were a Danite or you were from the family of the Issachar, the tribe of Issachar, didn't necessarily mean you couldn't cross over at border, like, well, there's the line right there. We can't go down no further. We'll be over in Benjamin's land. People lived in different areas, and I'd imagine Jerusalem had a good representation of all of the tribes. But if you were a captive taken to Assyria and they put you wherever, and you still got your family, where your roots are and so forth, and then, years later, your children, your grandchildren, they're like, man, why don't we go back, Why don't we go? I hear that things are happening in Jerusalem now. Why would, they do. And so all the tribes would be involved. The Jews would return home to Canaan from all over, not just the captives of Babylon. What happened after World War II? Remember? Now, I'm not saying it's got anything to do with the Bible, but what's that? A bunch of folks that called themselves Jews did what? They went to live there. And that's happened quite a few times in history. Jews they kind of hang out together. Have you ever noticed that? And I don't guess there's anything wrong with wanting to hang out with your tribe. I've noticed that around all the military bases there seems to be a little Korea. Reggie, you ever in the Army? Did you ever notice that? They got a whole group down there in Fort Stewart. They had their own little area in town. That's where all the Korean restaurants were. Some of the best beef bulgogi you'd ever want to have. That's the only thing I knew how to order, so I ate it a lot. But, people like to be together, and so the same thing with the Jews. But sometimes they have a tendency to rub people the wrong way, and that's why this has happened, several times over the course of years. But they're going to come from all different places. Number 3, David died in about 971 B.C. Jeremiah lived hundreds of years after David's death. Who then is the David whom God would raise up for his people? Well, it's pretty easy who that's going to be. It's going to be Jesus. He's from the tribe of Judah. He's going to be the deliverer. But who is this Elijah spoken of in Malachi chapter 4 verse 5? Who is Elijah? Well, Jesus said, remember his apostles asked him, the disciples asked him, why does everybody say we got to wait on Elijah? And, of course, Jesus tells them what it says in Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. And he says, for those who will accept it, it was John the Baptist. Came in the spirit of Elijah, if you will. Kind of wore the same clothes, didn't they? But now, if you happen to know any Moonies or anybody of those Eastern religions that believe in reincarnation, they'd say, Bible teaches reincarnation. right here, John the Baptist, he was a reincarnation of, of Elijah. Well, that's not so. But I guess if you want to believe something like that, anything could help you out. But no, he was in the spirit of Elijah. Number 4, in what way were the Jews experiencing a captivity? In what way was the Jews' experience in captivity a time of discipline and correction? In what way? Y'all answering these questions? Oh, I'm getting out there, ain't I? Yeah, hey, we got to move now. Hey, speaking of which, I won't be here. We're not going to have this class on 2/24, but we're going to make it up the last class of the year. We're not going to take those chapters and look at them the last class. We're going to stay on this current theme here, but we'll have 2 hours that final night, okay? I need to be somewhere one week, and Rick needs to be somewhere the other, so we're going to kind of tag team that. So that's how that's going to work. Did all of y'all answer that at the same time? Because I couldn't hear it. No? Okay. I said, here's what I put. This is number 4, right? They were not completely destroyed, but punished in measure. Couldn't be left unpunished. But, sometimes we say the punishment fits the crime. Also, the Jews, God's got plans for them, right? They've got a job to do. What's that job? Why were they selected? What's their job? What was the Jews' job? Jews' job. What's that? That's right. Deliver the Messiah. And we need to be able to see it. We need to be able to see him. And when he comes, the people can say, Paul can preach. Peter could say this is that spoken by Joel. Paul, every time he'd get in a Jewish synagogue, would break out what books? The Old Testament. He'd say, this is how this is fulfilled. And so that they had a job to do, and thanks be unto God, they did it. And the whole early church was of what nationality? They were Jews for a long time there, weren't they? At least some people speculate a decade, but anyway, to Cornelius and his bunch, right? The Samaritans there in Acts chapter 8. But boy, I appreciate it. Really thank you for being here tonight. Reggie, if you ain't too rusty being in Alaska all that time, would you be kind enough to dismiss us in prayer?